an area that where the people were deeply conservative, very religious. He has a couple brothers who are Lutheran pastors, whatever, very much into you don't waste anything. They had a part of their property where he grew up with animals where they didn't touch it. It was sort of like set aside for God. We don't touch that part. And one of the stories in his biography is that on Easter, which is a big religious holiday for Christians, of course, they would go out to that creek that flowed through that patch of land and get a bucket of water. And then members of the family would sort of like a sprinkling of water to renewal of the spring and connection with the earth. Bubolz, as I said, he was involved in advising on the founding here. We also had a lot of non-European family involvement. There are 3 native tribes here, but there are many different types of Indian tribes here. And one of them, biggest one being the Menominee Indians. Hillary Wakaw, who was in the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame, joined with white European members of the community to protect the Wolf River. There have been talk about mining, and the impacts of mining can be very severe if it's not watched very closely. And he helped organize that and do this cross-cultural alliance in the 1970s and 80s. The environmental movement is an inclusive movement, and you see a person like this who looks like, well, kind of a crazy person, right? But not necessarily. The roles of acting and of costume sometimes go to those who are powerless. They have no other way to speak out. Oftentimes you'll find women involved in this activity because the men can go to the sort of town square and argue things out and try to throw their height and weight around. And the women will do other things, auxiliary type work, or in the case they have something called the Raging Grannies. You'll see it a lot of movements in Madison today, yet older women taking the role of the grandmother and speaking up for what they believe is right. One aspect of citizen involvement is being celebrated this year. The Bay Beach Wildlife Sanctuary, which is down the road, was started by the activities of local teachers in part. I don't have their pictures here. Helen Anderskevich was one, and Chester Cole another. During the drought of the 1930s, they spoke with the recognized male civic leaders, Judge Henry Grass, Lyle Kingston, who was an engineer at Wisconsin Public Service, and they got the city to set aside this piece of land, and then they built a series of lagoons as a place where the waterfowl could stay over winter and reproduce. Today there are like 1 million visitors a year to this environmental education center. Another aspect of citizen involvement involves the Green Bay Metropolitan Sewage District. Was in the late 20s and early 30s that a local attorney named Myra Cohen organized campaigns to make people aware that there were things we could do with the sewage besides dump it in the river. Sewage treatment started in Wisconsin in the late 1800s, and some cities were more advanced than others. Green Bay was kind of a laggard. And he helped organize the publicity campaign showing people that you could light a match at the mouth of the East and Fox Rivers and you would get fire over the surface. And with the help of newspapers and radio, this was popularized and the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Sewage District was created. Another aspect is private individual involvement in groups. Of course, America is said historically to be a place of associations and clubs. They seem to love to form groups, the Tocqueville said. And the Isaac Walton League had a strong base in the Fox Wolf Valley, with some of the cities having 300, 500, 600 members. People grew up in it. And these 3 pictures are 3 attorneys who took on the role of environmental interveners, filing lawsuits on existing statutes and at times trying to create laws to clean up the rivers and streams that they loved. After World War II, these were military vets, and invigorated with the sense of power and possibilities, they said, we can change this society, and they ran an election campaign. Fred Kaftan, who was state senator, had one issue, and that was clean up the rivers. And he was elected as a Republican, which is in some ways a contradiction, because the people who he was saying should be sort of brought to the social norm of cleaning up your mess were big paper company owners. And so there had to be a reconciliation and discussion about, well, gosh, we got to do this, and this is going to cost money, and it's going to cost jobs, whatever. But he didn't get everything he wanted at first, but he helped create the first DNR engineering board, where they looked at water quality all across the state. And not to be partisan about it, there were also, well, there were Democrats and Republicans both. At one time, the environment was more of a unifying issue than a divisive issue. The surprise was in 1970 when Gordon Bluebolts, who was a stalwart in the Republican Party, announced publicly that he was going to support the Democratic candidate for governor. And he says, "What are you doing, Gordon?" Well, there had been an administrative board for the Fox River, and he says all the people on it are vice presidents of the paper companies or related companies. He says that's a conflict of interest. Even if they intend to do good, it doesn't have the appearance of transparency. And he had been elected to the state senate of Wisconsin in 1948, the same year that Fred Kaftan was. Fred Kaftan's major accomplishment was really singular. He got the allocation so that there would be state representatives monitoring the water quality across the state. And there were like 6 or 8 of them. They could file reports and saying that this dairy company, this pea cannery needs to clean up, fish are dying, whatever. All these activities, though, didn't do what was desired, which was to have the rivers fishable and swimmable. It took an act of the U.S. Congress in 1972, the Clean Water Act amendments, which required all states in the United States to have the same sort of basement level standards that all paper mills, whether it's in Georgia or Idaho or Maine, had to reduce the pollution from that process to a certain level, and then it would be considered fair. So this act is the most important act in cleaning up the environment of Wisconsin and other states in water. Changed, the rivers had been smelly sewer ditches, and all of a sudden they were clean, and people wanted to build grand homes on them, whereas in the past the land was dirt cheap. Nobody wanted to be near the stink. They said it smelled like a pigsty in the summertime when the water would warm up. As the waters recovered their oxygen, the fish came in out of the lake, and all of a sudden what were dead rivers before now had massive fish populations, and that brought in the fishermen. And it brought in the boaters, and it brought in the people who built hotels and restaurants along the river, and all the associated economic activity. Now, we're talking about the future was one part of the title, sort of the assignment. What's going to happen in the future? Well, historians are very good at looking back. You know, dangerous to look ahead, but what happens in a locale happens to recur. And we look to Madison. Well, the focus has always been on getting state government to act as well as federal. In the 1960s, there was something called the Red Shirts. There had been proposals to build dams along the Wolf River north of the Menominee Indian Reservation. And that would have wiped out a lot of trout streams, although it would have created some jobs or maybe increased the property value. The trout fishermen and other local people went to Madison and dressed in at that time, instead of the blaze orange, people wore red shirts, so they were called red shirts, and they showed up and marched around the Capitol. If you've watched the news in the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of people down at Madison marching around the Capitol. It's a part of almost the culture of Wisconsin to petition government for what was seen as a need. And if asked about the future, all I can say, well, those things happened in the past, I bet they're going to happen again. Citizen involvement and protest, negotiation, stormy comments at times, but they're going to work it out. They're going to be active about it. They're not going to sit back in passivity. So my time is up. Thanks for putting that clock there. I'll answer any questions, and then
Well, I've got one starting out. I've heard the stories I know from the video you did about the perfuming of the East River because of the smell and things like that. Was that a one-time occurrence, or did that happen more often?
yeah, the perfuming of the river, this is refers to in the late 50s. Big part of the public objection was, of course, first of all, it looked like garbage in the river, but it stunk. And the people who lived within a mile of the river had to keep their windows closed. Well, that was bad for business if you're running a store, and bad for renting out an apartment, bad for a house, whatever. What can we do about that if the places that were polluting the river say, well, we can't afford to clean it up, and that the sewage treatment plant, whatever. What are the alternatives? Well, one alternative is to spray perfume on the river. And they had these big sprayers, and it actually had been tested in some other parts of the country, some chemistry to neutralize the odor chemicals. It didn't work, that's the point. There were, I guess I'll leave it at that. Yes?
Oh, I understood that back in the late 20s, they used to put garbage out on the East River when it was frozen and use it as a garbage.
Right.
Used to drain out. Is that a true story?
Right. The question was, is it a true story that people put their household garbage out on the ice during the winter time so that when the ice would melt, it would float out to the bay? And that's true. There was not an organized garbage pickup in the winter. Pick up only in the summer, so what you do, a lot of people had garbage pits in their backyard. But the idea was that everybody else is throwing stuff in the river. Ours can't add much more to that weight, and that's what people did. There's been a massive change in our attitudes, and that's the hopeful and promising part of this whole story, that people's attitudes can change. Their behavior can change. Everything that's happened since this university was founded has been about cultural change. I remember when I couldn't get vegetables or broccoli in a restaurant. They said, "What? You want some vegetables? Here, some lettuce." I said, "I don't think that's what I'm talking about." Now you have a whole variety of foods that are available, and even places like McDonald's are selling carrot sticks and healthy foods. Smoking. People used to smoke in the classrooms of this campus. They used to smoke in the offices of the building I worked at downtown. And people say, "You're never going to change that." Well, look what changed. We are capable of great change. We can do great things. And we have to realize that and support each other when we do change. Okay? Thank you very much.